Greetings and welcome to part one of the narrated PowerPoint for chapter 11. The focus is decision making. We'll start by doing our best to understand decision making with a definition. Decision making, it says, refers to selecting choices among alternative courses of action. One of those will be inaction. In other words, do nothing. Increasing your effectiveness in decision making is, in fact, a part of maximizing your overall effectiveness. The more that you make better decisions, the greater the likelihood that you will achieve your goals. Let's talk about different kinds of decisions. The first kind are what we call programmed decisions. These are the ones that happen so often that we, in fact, come up with automated rules, responses for them. For example, which side of the bed should we climb out of in the morning? In what order should we take our shower? Washing our hair versus washing up our body. We don't even think about these kinds of decisions. We literally give them no thought. We have created rules in our heads so that we don't need to make these decisions on the regular. And then there are non-programmed decisions. These are the things that actually require conscious thinking, information gathering, careful consideration of alternatives. This stuff is really difficult because about 80% of our day is spent doing things that are habitual to us, basically making programmed decisions where we're frankly not putting a whole lot of thought into making those decisions. We don't need to. The route that you might take home from work or school, the order of operations in the morning in terms of what you do when you first wake up until you're leaving the house, assuming you're leaving the house, right? These are things we don't give hardly any thought to. As a result, when we are presented with having to make a non-programmed decision, they are really challenging for us. The brain, like any other muscle, requires exercise. And because our brain doesn't get constantly exercised in terms of making non-programmed decisions, they're a little bit rougher for us. Within organizations, specifically, we might classify decisions using the following framework, where we have strategic decisions being the ones that this is for the whole organization going forward. Then we've got tactical decisions. These are decisions about how things will get done. And then finally, the operational stuff, the stuff that most of us are familiar with, the day-to-day, how do we get by kinds of decisions. Let's do some examples. At the strategic level for an organization, the organization's top leaders, the folks in the C-suite, the CEO, the CFO, the COO, et cetera, might discuss and have to decide whether the organization should merge with another organization. They may have to decide whether to pursue a new product line. They may have to consider whether they should downsize their organization. Now, what does that mean? That means eliminating members of the organization. You might think of it as a layoff, if you will. Typically, downsizing will involve white-collar workers. The whole idea is to end up with an organization that is perhaps quite a bit smaller than it was previously. Again, who's making these decisions? The folks in the C-suite, the top management team, perhaps the board of directors if it's a publicly traded organization or a nonprofit organization that relies on a board of directors to make these key strategic decisions. The next level decisions, the tactical ones, tend to be made mostly by managers in the middle of the organization, but also sometimes by managers overseeing frontline staff. Whereas the top would have talked about, should we merge? This level of decision making will focus more on what should we do to help facilitate employees from the two different companies working together now that it's going to be one merged company. How should we market that new product line that the top management has decided we're going to pursue? And really hard questions. Who should be let go when we downsize? What criteria should we use to decide whether someone should be let go? Finally, the operational decisions. These are the decisions that when you're not yet a manager in an organization, these are the kinds of decisions that you might make. Again, going back to this overall example of a merger, you might, as an employee, be thinking about how you're going to communicate with your new coworkers. What will it be like to deal with these people? With a new product line, as a frontline staff person, you might be asking yourself, what should I say to customers about this new product? And then if the organization does decide to downsize and you're one of the folks remaining, how will you balance your new work demands? Because most likely the work that needs to be done won't have gone away. There'll just be fewer people to do it, which means as one of those remaining, you're going to have more to do. Okay, let's talk about some decision-making models. First, let me take care of something. Lots of noise in the background. Lots of noise in the background that needed some diminishing by closing a door. All right. So some different decision-making models. I'm going to be talking about 4. The first one is the rational decision-making model. And this model describes the steps that if you use this model, decision makers should consider if the goal is to maximize the quality of their outcome. Another word that you might use is optimize. We want the best decision. So let's walk through an example. The first thing we need to do is identify the problem. Well, let's say you decide the problem is I'm hungry and I need to choose a restaurant. The second step is to establish the decision criteria. The criteria that will help you choose from among those alternative choices. Remember, that's what decision making is all about. So you might come up with 3 criteria. The first criterion, it has to cost less than $15 for an entree. The second criterion, the restaurant has to offer takeout. And the third criterion, the restaurant has to be within walking distance. You're not picky about food type, let's say. These are the 3 criteria that you've identified. Third, you need to somehow weigh those decision criteria. So you decide your rank order is the thing that matters most is whether they do takeout. The thing that matters second most is whether it's in walking distance. And you're least concerned, but still concerned, about the price. So fourth is when you generate alternatives. Now, with rational decision making, you need to generate all of the alternatives, not some of the alternatives, but all of the alternatives. So let's say what you do is you go online and you look for all of the options in, let's say, De Pere, okay? De Pere, Wisconsin. So you want a listing of all the restaurants. Then what you're going to do is assess each one of those options against the criteria. So you would look at all of the restaurants. I have no idea how many there are in De Pere. Let's say there are 40, just for the sake of conversation. The actual number could be more, could be less, but let's just say that the population of restaurants in De Pere, Wisconsin is 40. You can sort of imagine a spreadsheet in which you would, in the first column, have the names of all the restaurants that you've identified, that you've gone online and found. And then the next 3 columns, at the top of each column, and the first one would be takeout, yes or no, right? The second column might be labeled walking distance. That's where you would put in how many miles away from your home the particular restaurant is, and then uh, price, sort of the average price for an entree. That would be the label for the third column. All right, so what you would do then is you'd fill in your spreadsheet. Just fill in those values. You know, do they offer takeout? Yes or no? How many miles away is the restaurant from your home? Indicate that. And then what's the average price per entree? From there, you got the spreadsheet going. You've got all your data in the spreadsheet. You're going to choose the restaurant that best fits the criteria. Remember, you're looking to optimize. So you want the very best of all the possibilities. That's what step 6 is all about. Step 7, you're going to go there and buy your food. Let's say you discover that McGeorge's in De Pere is less than a mile from your house. They do have takeout, and the average cost for an entree is only $9. Awesome. So you go to McGeorge's, or you call first, right? And you place your order, and then at the appointed time, you walk and you go and get your food. So you have implemented your decision. And then finally, you decide, did you make a good choice? So this is evaluating the decision. Where you basically ask the question, would I go there again? And you already know that the restaurant fit your criteria. So now you'll have to think about other things. For example, was the food quality high enough for you? Did you in fact enjoy what you bought for the price tag? Was it good value? Again, so that you can decide, would you go there again? Pretty straightforward, right? Now, let me point out a couple of things. First of all, in order to use this model, again, remembering what I said, you need to be able to identify your decision criteria and then rank order them. Now, realistically, human beings can only juggle so many decision criteria, somewhere between 3 and 7, not more than that, not realistically, even though there could be more. So this is a potential issue with this model. Our capability as human beings might in fact make it very difficult to use this model because of the limitations on the number of decision criteria that we can consider. Another issue with this is this whole generating alternatives. And remember, I said you need to generate all of the alternatives. And that's because we're trying to optimize. We're trying to make the best choice, the one best choice. Well, that requires, again, that we generate all of the alternatives. What if instead of 40 restaurants, there were 1,000 restaurants? How would that play out? You know, it's Friday, you're hungry, you want to eat. Are you going to take the time, realistically, to evaluate 1,000 restaurants? Even 100 would take you a lot of time, wouldn't it? Realistically, then, the rational decision making model might only make sense if, one, we're letting a computer run that optimization set of questions, okay, because computers can manage, frankly, more decision criteria. They can also process at a higher speed than you or I can. So maybe if there's the possibility of having a computer make the decision, okay, then the model might work. Also, this is important, the information has to be available. In this particular example, I'm talking about, for example, the information around the decision criteria. What if there are a whole bunch of restaurants that don't list what the average entree prices are? What if they don't have their menus online? What if trying to find that information just proves incredibly difficult or expensive in terms of your time? Obviously, that's problematic. So this model works if information is in fact available. And finally, this model can work if you have enough time to do all of the steps. If you don't have enough time, well, then you're probably going to use a different model to make that decision. and you're going to be perhaps less interested in optimizing your solution. Well, let's see what some options are. One really great option is called the bounded rationality model. With the bounded rationality model, we're doing a lot of what we did with the rational decision making model, except, first of all, our goal changes. Our goal is no longer to optimize, our goal is to make a good enough decision, one that will hit on enough of the decision criteria, one that we can make in a reasonable amount of time with a reasonable amount of effort. This model states that individuals knowingly limit their options to a manageable set and choose the first acceptable alternative. So let's say we go back to the example of choosing a restaurant in De Pere. Would most people actually list all 40? Probably not, right? Instead, what they would do is think about the restaurants they're already familiar with. So I might rattle off McGeorge's, the Ennis Inn. Maybe I'll just go and get popcorn at the cinema. The Chatter House, Nikki's. Maybe I throw in Luna for good measure. In other words, I'm just thinking about the places that are mostly on George in East De Pere and Maine in West De Pere. So maybe I throw in Brick House and Julie's Cafe. Okay, I might end up with 15 restaurants, but I'm really not going to be interested in thinking about more. I mean, think about all the times that you've thought about where you want to go and grab a bite to eat. How many places do you actually think of? Probably not all of the places within a particular radius, right? Okay. So we have this tendency, as I said, to use this model instead whenever we don't have a lot of time, whenever we don't have perfect information, whenever exerting more effort we decide wouldn't necessarily get us a better decision or a decision that's much better. Important to this model is this idea of satisficing. That's not a typo. That shouldn't say satisfying. Satisficing is the right word, and this simply refers to accepting the first alternative that meets your minimum criteria. So as soon as you land on a place that seems walkable, that does takeout, where you know that, yeah, they serve entrees that'll cost you less than $15, it's like, that's the place. That's the place. That place is good enough. Now, let me tell you something. You not only use this model, and trust me, you use this model all the time. Most people do, all the time, routinely. Not just for simple decisions like where should we go grab a bite, but even for really big decisions like what house should I buy? Or who should I choose for my partner? The person you want to marry, let's say. You might think to yourself, no, Lucy, no. For those kinds of things, I'm trying to optimize. No, you're not. Let me use a quick example around the issue of picking your partner for the long term. There are over 7 billion people on this planet. Over 7 billion. Even if we take out the people who are too old for you, whatever that means, right? Too young for you, again, whatever that means. Already in committed relationships. Let's just go after the ones who are free and single. Of the gender and sexual orientation that is your preference, your assignment. Okay. How many people are we talking about? Still probably at least a couple billion. Even if it was a billion, even if it was just a million or 100,000 or even 1,000. Are you seriously going to vet 1,000 people in order to choose your life partner? I doubt it. And why not? Is it because you don't think you're good enough to find your perfect match? No, that's silly, right? It's because you don't want to spend your entire life looking for this person. You'd like to find someone to spend most of your life with. So basically, and don't take this the wrong way, you're going to settle. That's what satisficing means. It means you settle. You choose the first person who seems to be pretty good on most of the criteria that matter a lot to you: shared values, shared interests, similar personality, in the right age range, at a level of attractiveness that you consider appropriate. You can see where I'm going with this, right? You might have like 7 criteria that really matter. And again, as soon as you find somebody who seems to hit on all of those, who also thinks that you hit on theirs, right? Well, voila, there's your person. You're not going to keep looking to see if there's somebody even better, are you? No, you're going to go with that person. Now, here's the good news. Generally speaking, when we use this model to make decisions, we make pretty good decisions. We do. We absolutely do. And you might be thinking to yourself, well, what about all those divorces? Well, even if it's at 50%, this model, given the amount of time it saves you, the amount of effort that it saves you, those are actually pretty good odds when you talk about spending the rest of a lifetime with someone. 50 years, 60 years? Holy mackerel, how much will you change over the course of that time, right? To be able to make a forecast as to with whom might you enjoy spending your time for that amount of time, that's pretty amazing that anybody gets that right, isn't it? Bottom line, we tend to make a lot of good enough decisions. And for the most part, that's okay. Another approach is to make our decisions intuitively. This model refers to arriving at decisions without necessarily spending a whole lot of time in conscious reasoning. In other words, we follow our gut. We do what feels right. Experts making decisions scan the environment for cues to recognize patterns and then act based on prior experience. In fact, a lot of top level leaders make their decisions intuitively. Absolutely. They have accumulated a lot of experience so that they just know, their gut tells them what the right course of action will be. Now, that doesn't mean that they ignore data that might be available. They'll look at the data, but ultimately, they're going to make a decision based on what feels right. Think about for yourself, as an example, your choice in St. Norbert College. I'd be willing to bet that for most of you, that decision was either the result of you using the bounded rationality model, or you made that decision intuitively. And what I mean by that is, yeah, you may have thought about a number of important criteria, but in the end, what really helped to make the decision for you was maybe something as simple as what it felt like when you were on campus, when you did a tour, if it felt like home to you, if it felt comfortable to you, if St. Norbert College seemed like a place where you would be a good fit. That's a perfect example of you using intuition to make a decision. Again, just like the bounded rationality model, it's actually a perfectly good way to make decisions. Again, top leaders do it all the time, and an awful lot of their decisions work out. All right. Fourth approach. Here we're talking very specifically about making creative decisions. So, what is creativity? It's the generation of new and imaginative ideas. And I would add to this, useful ideas. So, not just something that's new, not just something that nobody else has ever thought of, but the idea also has to be useful. 5 steps. There it is. In fact, these steps, for the most part, also relate to the prior models that we've discussed. Let's quickly walk through them. First is problem recognition. What's the gap between what is and what we want to have happen? Reality, expectation. Reality, aspiration. The gap, that's the problem. Step 2, we immerse ourselves in thinking about the problem. What do we know? What don't we know? Who knows something that we might need to know? Third, incubation. This is when we let our unconscious brain just sort of ponder, weigh things, sift things. Again, you can see where intuition is going to step in here, can't you? And then step 4, all of a sudden, is the aha. Oh, wait, I know what to do. I know what the right choice is. So you go ahead and you implement the choice, and now you got to test it out. Is it, in fact, the right choice, the right decision? So these are the questions. These are the things that you'll be thinking about. 3 factors that we use to evaluate the level of creativity: fluency, flexibility, originality. Fluency is talking about how many ideas you're able to generate. For example, I say to you, imagine that you have a warehouse full of pool noodles, and for whatever reason, demand for pool noodles to be used as pool noodles has dropped off so significantly that basically that warehouse full of pool noodles is useless to you, is valueless to you if you try to market them as pool noodles. So you bring in a group of people, your employees, and you say, we got to come up with new ways to market these pool noodles. Fluency then will be, as you ask each person to come up with ideas, how many ideas do they come up with? The more ideas they come up with, the more fluent they are. Flexibility is how different the ideas are from each other. For example, coming up with ideas that are still basically things you would do in a pool. Well, those things aren't very different from each other, right? But things you might use in a pool versus things you might use in the house versus things a person might use in their workplace versus things a person might use when they're camping versus things a person might use when they're boating versus, I could keep going. You get the idea. The more different the ideas are from one another, the more flexibility we say. And then originality is how unique your ideas are. Is anybody else coming up with your ideas, or are you the only person coming up with those ideas? How can we enhance creativity within organizations? 4 things. Composition. Remember when we talked about teams in chapter 9 and we talked about composition of the group? Well, here are some things we can do if we're looking to be more creative. Diversify the team. So we got to have lots of diversity. Change up the group membership. Introduce new people who think differently. Maybe have leaderless teams. Remember, these are the self-managed teams where we don't have a boss that everyone just looks to and just follows. Team process. Remember, that was another one of the components. For a process for how we get work done, we could engage in brainstorming. We could use the nominal group technique. I'll talk about that in part 2. We could use analogies. Like imagine we were trying to decide how to market St. Norbert College going forward. Well, one of the things that we might do in focus groups is ask people to share analogies with us. For example, we might say, if you think about St. Norbert as a car, what kind of car do you think of? Or you think about St. Norbert College as a musical genre. What musical genre would it fit? Or, and you keep going. And what these analogies reveal is sort of new and interesting ways to think about the topic, the product, the service, whatever it might be. Leadership fits into what we called in the chapter 9 discussion context. Remember, I mentioned that leadership, which wasn't listed in your lecture outline, I said that's part of what helps teams to be effective. Well, leaders can challenge their teams to be creative. They can let people decide how they're going to achieve their goals, give them that autonomy that we know helps people choose to be motivated. They can support and celebrate creativity, and they can also themselves role model creative behavior. Notice how what you're seeing here associated with leadership ties back to the chapter 12 material on leadership, right? Role modeling was part of transformational leadership. It was also part of charismatic leadership. Finally, culture, organizational culture. Just one idea is to build a physical space that's actually conducive to creativity. Let people personalize their workspace. Don't have people in cubicles where they can't see each other, for example. That doesn't enable people to brainstorm, to share ideas, and so on. So, which of these decision-making models should you use? Well, it depends. It depends. So we're going to take a contingency approach here. It depends on what? So the rational decision-making model makes the most sense when you can, in fact, gather and quantify information on all of the alternatives, not some of the alternatives, all of the alternatives. When the decision is so important that you feel the need to maximize your outcome, to optimize your outcome. And I'm going to add, when you have enough time and you have the resources to support the search for alternatives, the time needed to evaluate those alternatives, etc. Okay? Use the bounded rationality model when the minimum criteria are clear, you don't have or you're not willing to invest too much time to make the decision, right? And maximizing your outcome isn't necessarily what you're going for. You will be okay with not the optimal, but still good enough. Still has to be good enough. So we're not settling for something that's bad, okay? The outcome that we choose still needs to actually solve our problem. The intuitive model makes a lot of sense when the goals are unclear, there's time pressure. Analysis paralysis would be costly. Analysis paralysis is when we continue to try and gather more and more information. We continue to try and analyze that information. We just keep spending time spinning around the whole gathering information, evaluating information, gathering information, evaluating information. And so we don't get around to acting. Also, you need to have some experience with the problem. Otherwise, your gut isn't going to give you the right signal. When you were choosing St. Norbert College, if for those of you who sort of thought about, does this place feel like home to me? You could do that. You could use intuitive decision making because you know what home feels like. You do. So you can spot it when you're in another place. Finally, creative decision making makes sense when solutions to the problem aren't clear, new ideas need to be generated, and we have enough time to immerse ourselves in the issues. That brings us to the end of first part of chapter 11.